Hi again. This is chapter 8 of William Schnell's book, 30 Years a Watchtower Slave. The chapter is entitled God's Organization. The first subhead is A Discrepancy Removed. With the work of 1926 in full swing, organization methods progressing everywhere throughout the congregations along the lines described in the preceding chapter, it became increasingly clear from a doctrinal point of view that there was a glaring discrepancy in our sustained vociferous attack against Christendom because of its use of the principle of organization, and our own building of a highly efficient organization and our very evident use of organizational methods. With the London Convention of 1926 coming up, we were told from Brooklyn that something big would come up there which would settle this apparent discrepancy. Thus, once again, we of Bethel awaited with great expectancy the announcement of a new truth from Brooklyn. With typical Watchtower expediency and about-fact method came the judge's, I think that should be about-face method, but let it stand. About-fact method came the judge's justifying argumentation. And a rich one it was. It ran something like this. God has an organization and has had one from the beginning, from the time he started creating. But Satan stole a march on God by using the organization for himself. Satan, as the mimic God, subverted organization to his use. But there was a God organization, or a God's organization, which was primeval, and which the Watchtower elucidated was God's woman. In this weird claim that God has an organization and that this organization is a woman, the society was not only justifying its organization, it was likewise laying an esoteric basis for increasing or increase by works, rituals, time counting and reporting, book placements, and book studies. The new publishers emerging from such works as new members, they claim, were born of God's woman, just like children born naturally of a woman. According to this explanation, all churches and worldly organizations are Satan's organization, and all those who have come out from these under the guidance of God's organization into publisher relationship with the Watchtower Society have thus become the offspring of God. God's organization then was directed from Brooklyn, New York. Satan's organization was directed from London, England. Thus was the crude basis laid in 1926 for what would be built upon as time went on until the theocracy of 1938 would emerge as God's sole representative on earth. All organizations outside of the Watchtower Society were Satan's organization. Political and commercial organizations were classified as Egypt. The Catholics and Protestant organizations became the Moabites, the Ammonites, and the Edomites, and so on down the line. Clannishness and exclusiveness now became the policy of the Watchtower organization, with all members on the inside looking out upon all Christian churches and the rest of the world and mankind as being on the outside. Jehovah's Witnesses now were the ins, and all others, regardless of who they were the outs. It is from this position of cleavage taught in 1926, and consistently from then on, that the subsequent behavior of Jehovah's Witnesses towards other organizations and towards the nations in which they lived was based. Their witnessing no longer consisted of gentle efforts to teach Christ and baptize believers, but degenerated into organized forays and attacks upon enemies. Their visits to the homes of the people, from house to house, were no longer simple acts of preaching, but were a spoiling of the Egyptians. By getting as many and as large contributions as possible, their visits to study groups became an infiltration of the homes of the other sheep to steal them away from Satan's organization. Laws requiring permits to regulate sales in communities were considered a framing of mischief by law against God's organization to interfere with kingdom publishers. Thus it was quite proper for Jehovah's Witnesses to ignore these laws on this premise. Arrest for such violations was in no way something to avoid or fear, for this was in reality a persecution for my name's sake, using the Lord's statement. All sense of values by which mankind in general lives when civilized was warped by this new theocratic organization doctrine, and a casuistry was employed, which made that practice by the Jesuits a mere bagatelle. Saluting or honoring the emblems of the state was bowing down to Satan's image and was prohibited. It was all right to bow down to the Watchtower Society of Brooklyn because it had now become God's organization. But anything not approved from there was from now on to be opposed. Bearing arms or going to war was only proper now if called by God's organization, just like it had been for the Israelites when they fought the Philistines. Jehovah's Witnesses never were opposed to war, nor are they conscientious objectors in the true sense of the word. They believe that all the wicked shall be killed. And by the wicked, they mean all who are not of God's organization, the Watchtower organization. In fact, they preach that all such who are other organizations, unless they flee to the city of refuge, meaning God's organization, sponsored by the Watchtower Society, shall be destroyed. And in recent Watchtowers, they have asserted that in Armageddon, when all the wicked will be slain, the little children of such wicked ones will also be slain. This is written from the perspective of the mid-1950s. In answering as to how to treat opposers to the truths promulgated by the Watchtower Society, if they were once members of the faith and have recanted, representatives of the society allegedly say, it is impossible to kill them, as the laws of the land do not permit that. But were God's law in effect, meaning were we, as God's organization, already the New World Society, then they would be killed. The best thing to do under the circumstances is to treat them as if they were dead. By the way, that is exactly how, under the Brooklyn tutelage, my family, who are rabid Jehovah's Witnesses, have been treating me since I left the Watchtower. Subversion behind. Striking out for the freedom of the sons of God. Thus, from the day the Watchtower organization became God's woman, it became set to oppose to death every civilized action and code of behavior ever developed among men. This reached its climax in conjuring up the rain of fire from heaven, the savage prognostication of a coming total mass destruction in Armageddon of all men outside of the Watchtower organization. We were not long in putting these concepts into practice, but before I get into that, there are a few important points which I should further explain and which occurred subsequent to the London Convention. Next time he's going to be talking about the incentive plan and something called Cadaver Gehorsam. Put in a link to the Watchtower version of Armageddon described briefly here, and the Revelation 16 version of Armageddon as described throughout not just Revelation, but the rest of the Bible, specifically the Old Testament. See you next time.